Welcome to the Experience Darden podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. So on this episode of the podcast, I'd like to feature a conversation I recently recorded with Marlon Evans. Marlon is a second-year student here at Darden, and he and I recently sat down to talk a little bit more about how he decided to pursue an MBA, what led him to Darden, and how his experience has been so far. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Marlon Evans. Marlon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right. So for our listeners at home, tell us a little bit more about you. What's your background? What did you do before you came to Darden?
Yep. So I came to Darden from Washington, D.C., just like a bunch of other classmates of mine. I was actually a double who. So I was born in Virginia. My dad was in the Air Force. We moved around a little bit. And then I came to the University of Virginia, where I studied psychology and economics. After graduating, I moved to D.C., and that's where I kind of got my start in the consulting industry, but primarily working in back office functions. So profit and loss analysis, contract negotiations, a lot of different kind of business administration functions. So kind of your typical MBA background, a lot of Excel, things like that. So I was working for about 8 years. I'm a little bit older than the kind of average Darden student. And I was just getting really bored with the back office. And so I had a path to kind of manage a business for the serial entrepreneurs that I was working for, but I wasn't really feeling the work as much. And so I knew I always wanted to get my MBA, and I knew that it was a good way to kind of switch gears. And so took the GMAT, did pretty well, decided that, I was going to apply to a bunch of programs and, ended up getting into, a couple programs and deciding to come back to Darden or to the University of Virginia.
Yeah, so let's talk about the decision to get an MBA. You mentioned that you thought about it for a little while. What pushed you over sort of, I know I'm going to do this? It sounds like maybe there was some feeling of stagnation in your career, but anything else?
Yeah, so I had met at the time a lot of people who had gotten their MBAs. And so I did a couple pre-MBA programs as I was kind of exploring and really meeting with some of these people, hearing about their stories and hearing about what they were able to do after getting the MBA. It was really important to kind of push me to get the decision because I had been toying with taking the GMAT for so long. I've been taking practice tests, but I really didn't have that motivation because, I was working, had a pretty good job, was where I wanted to be financially, but really needed that extra push. So I knew that I wanted to maybe work in a different industry other than consulting, perhaps like technology. And so when I talked to people that had gotten their MBAs, some people that had gone to Darden, some people elsewhere, and they let me know, kind of where they ended up, it was the push for me.
So as you thought about the potential career paths, how did you investigate some of those interests?
So I did a lot of research, and so I started off, and luckily I was in this like pre-MBA program that had me working with a consultant, but also had me doing a lot of research into both the schools I wanted to go to, what the options were there, and then the jobs that I wanted to pursue. And so as I tried to make a match between the school and the function that I wanted to have when I graduated, I started really digging deep into tech. For me, I've been working in business administration for consulting firms and internal strategy for a really long time, and it touched all industries, but I felt like I wasn't really getting the depth in any one of those individual industries. And so I started thinking about longevity, and for me, tech was just really exciting. Like it was a passion of mine on the side. And, I wanted to make it a career option as well. And so I started researching different companies, startups, as well as big firms, and really realized like there was just so much opportunity for me to apply the business skills that I'd learned kind of working at these corporations for quite some time to maybe a little bit more of a product management role. And so I looked at Darden, especially because I knew they were starting to build big relationships with companies like Amazon. And, I had talked to some people that had gone to Microsoft after. And so I really wanted to start in big tech because I felt like it would be a good way for me to get an idea of what the roles were like and what the functions were like in an environment where, if I drop the ball, the company is not going to sink. And so yeah, kind of looking into those different roles and functions at especially Amazon and Microsoft really pushed me to really think hard about Darden and a couple other key programs.
So let me ask you about, before we get to your why Darden part of your story, you said you did some tech on the side. What did that look like?
Yeah, so when I grew up, my dad was kind of like a computer nerd. We always had a computer in the house, as long as I can remember. And so he really sparked that kind of passion for me. Like he would build systems at home and, order RAM and whatever, graphics cards, and we would put them together. And then just as I grew older, as I was in high school, I realized, computers are just kind of really fun for me. So I never really got into any like advanced programming or anything, but was always just kind of messing around, like using little illustrators on the computer. Adobe was a big deal for us at high school, kind of editing pictures of our teachers and just doing really funny things there. And so I kind of just grew up around computers, and it was always something that I felt was a big part of my life just because of my dad as well.
So we talked about your decision to pursue an MBA and sort of investigation that you did there. What ultimately led you back to Charlottesville and to choose Darden?
So there are a couple things. One, I did kind of do the financials and thinking of perhaps being in New York or being in the Midwest, further away from my family. It was partially a financial decision because it ended up. UVA was very generous to me and kind of welcoming me back. But I'd say more than anything, when I really got down to two schools, I came to visit Darden on interview day, and it was really kind of sitting in the classroom. And I remember talking to my mom after that day and feeling like it had been a really special experience, like getting called on in a class as a prospective student. All the other schools that I visited, there was really no interaction with the prospectives aside from the lunch, kind of people taking you to and from class. And so as I kind of sat in, participated in one of the section's traditions, it was just really special. I will remember that econ class for quite some time.
Yeah, it's amazing. When you talk to people about why they chose the school, how many people reference their visit, their time on grounds as being this sort of experience that they really felt the community here. It sounds like that squares with your experience.
Yeah, and I had a lot of questions about coming back to the University of Virginia because I wanted to kind of expand my network. And so when I really thought about it, Charlottesville, I'd already done Charlottesville, but when I talked to admissions and I wanted to know, like how different is this from the undergrad experience in your view? And it's been night and day. And so I think having that assurance and realizing that we're on a different side of Charlottesville, that, the experience is so much more interactive, really also kind of flipped me to make that decision after visiting.
Yeah, Darden's an interesting case as a business school, right? Because it's a small school, relatively speaking, in the world of business schools, about 330 or so students per class. You get this big university that comes with it. You live in a town that it's got some stuff, right? It's not a major city, but Charlottesville, there are things to do here if you want to be distracted. So it's a nice balance, I think.
Definitely, yeah. Especially, being at Darden where you have so many stimuli. So, like, you have your academics, which are very difficult. So it's great to be in a place where you have a little bit of a distraction, but you're also, like you mentioned, you're in a small, relatively small MBA program with a tight community. So you have your focus there as well.
And so what was that first year like? What was it like adjusting to life at Darden and business school? Yeah,
so it was a lot more difficult than I was expecting. I think I'd worked under deadlines for so long, kind of working in pricing strategy for consulting firms. Like, you're always working late at night. And I felt there was a lot of pressure for winning contracts for my company. But I thought that would translate to Darden a little better. But I think what was very difficult about the adjustment was the kind of breadth and how you have to stretch your mind. So I wasn't just working on something that I was very comfortable working on, finance or, negotiations. It was a lot of, LO and a lot of accounting, things that I hadn't really thought about in such a long time. So I felt like I was on this roller coaster ride and constantly being kind of, snatched in different directions. And it took a little while to figure out, who I could kind of lean on during those times, like who I could ask for help. And then it also took me a while to figure out, exactly what I needed to be spending my time doing. So not trying to do everything and really figuring out that, my learning team was there for a reason. All these great friends that I've been building relationships over those first couple months were a lot better at some of these subjects than me. So why not just sit down and talk to them? I think, the lesson of like asking for help was really the key that made the first year click for me, figuring out there are people I could rely on.
Was that tough to get to that point and sort of ask for help?
Yeah. For me, it was very difficult because I felt like in my job, I was really good at what I was doing. And I think a lot of people come into Darden feeling like, in your job, you're the subject matter expert. And so a lot of times people are coming to you for help or coming to you with questions. And so when I was here, it was the complete opposite. And an undergrad at UVA, it's a huge university, like you mentioned, or maybe not huge for some people, but pretty big. And so also speaking to professors was something that I was not very comfortable doing. And so, kind of figuring that out and figuring out they were there for help as well was a difficult lesson, but it really changed things for me almost overnight, like figuring out that I could ask.
So we talk about the learning curve with the first year, which is what you're talking about. When do you think it clicked for you? Sort of what you needed to do to get ready for class and sort of how you needed to operate to be successful here?
Yeah, actually, the first quarter I feel like was a test. Like I was just figuring everything out. And so all throughout that first quarter, I feel like there were lots of ups and downs and lots of different things that I tried that didn't work. And so by the time Q2 hit, I feel like I had a rhythm. I had my learning team, then I had my secondary learning team. And so at that point, I feel like things clicked and things got a lot easier. But that's also around the time that recruiting starts. And so, you're never really on solid footing those first two quarters, just because there's so many different things being thrown at you. Yeah. But looking back, and I told my mom this, I felt like I was so much smarter the beginning of Q3 than I had been kind of entering Darden. Not just in the subject matter, but also in like, how do I handle an immense amount of work and how do I kind of rely on people around me to kind of help me to kind of thrive.
And we ran a blog post earlier, I guess in 2018, where a student said there are really three things that you do in business school. It's school and job and extracurricular activities. Yeah. And you can maybe do two of these things really well simultaneously, but it's very hard to do all three. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So someone actually told me about the Holy Trinity before I came to Darden, and it's completely true. I think, I met a few people that can do it all, but, maybe aren't sleeping as much. And so I think you really do have to focus. And when you get here, academics is probably going to be number one in your mind because that's how the program is designed. And for good reason, too, because I think you really get immersed in the process, the case method, and really picking up the subjects. And then social, we're here for the extracurriculars and the social to meet people, to broaden our networks. And there are plenty of opportunities for that here. So I felt like, those two were most important to me as I got here. And then, once recruiting kicked in, that kind of takes maybe a little bit away from academics and a little bit away from social. But yeah, it's very difficult to do all three. I was never successful doing that, but yeah.
So let's talk about your summer internship. So where'd you spend the summer after your first year?
So I was at Microsoft in Seattle, technically Redmond, but I lived in Seattle this summer. And I was a business program manager, so it's kind of like a strategy and operations role. And I worked for the Azure team, which is essentially their cloud team, kind of going up against Amazon Web Services. And so it was exciting because I targeted that team. I knew it was the fastest growing organization at Microsoft, and so kind of landing that job was really important and made the summer a lot of fun.
So we know where Charlottesville is, and we know where Seattle is. There's some distance between these two places. How did you find West Coast recruiting from Charlottesville?
So luckily for me, I had interviewed with some tech firms through these pre-MBA programs before school. And so I had a relationship with Microsoft as I got to school. And then as I kind of networked, I did both consulting and tech. And so I networked with other consulting firms like Amazon and, other tech firms like Amazon. And then I think through that process, I realized that networking and recruiting for tech is a lot different than it was for consulting. So those two processes running in parallel were pretty much night and day. And so it wasn't difficult at all to continue those relationships from Charlottesville. And I feel like because Darden has become what it's become to companies like Amazon and Microsoft, that they really go out of their way to come here. And so I felt like the recruiting was pretty easy, and having that relationship with Microsoft and then getting to put faces to names once I was here at Darden was also pretty easy. I think the school made it pretty easy.
So this is an anecdotal observation, although I will say, I was struck by the fact that 18% of the students in the class of 2018 took jobs in technology. It seems like there's a growing tech interest here at Darden. Does that square with your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think talking to some of my classmates, a lot of us are thinking about, career longevity and where we're going to be 10 years from now in terms of jobs. And I think, tech is one of those areas where, the industry is going to provide the solutions for consulting, for healthcare, for retail. And so I think as a class and, as a cohort, the focus is growing every year, especially with classes that we take and, kind of data analytics. I think it really kind of gives you a window into, the power of all of the data that these tech firms are collecting, and then your ability to kind of do more consultative work based off of or within that industry. So I'd definitely say a lot of my classmates are very interested in tech, especially, ones that are interested in moving on to other industries kind of in the future.
Right, because I guess every industry ultimately becomes technology-based if you think about the solutions that companies are implementing now. So how do you feel Darden prepared you? And I think about our first year curriculum, there's nothing that's specifically related to cloud computing or anything that's technology specific, but you do get this sort of greatest hits of business school, so to speak. So how do you feel like Darden prepared you for the work that you did at Microsoft?
So one thing was just the amount of work that we did during the first year and managing that workflow, kind of as I spoke about earlier. Asking for help and figuring out how to handle such an immense workload was probably the biggest help to me over the summer. I went into Microsoft thinking, I had this reputation of, tech's kind of fun, pretty laid back. But my team was very small and very hard charging. And so I actually worked on 5 different projects over the summer. So I had 4 presentations, and having that kind of multidisciplinary focus and having been under a gun for essentially, the previous year was really helpful to me. And then just our decision analysis course, actually learning how to look at data and the right questions to ask. I spent a lot of time looking at customer data and looking at app data for the Microsoft Azure product line. And so really stepping in with that ability to kind of ask those questions and to parse data was also really important. I think it helped me to stand out among some of my other peers from other business schools.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me the things that people leverage in their summer, right? So you hear a lot of people talk about different classes or different experiences, but the one commonality I think I've heard from student to student is the fact that you're comfortable juggling a lot of things. Yep. You've had a lot on your plate, and so that does not feel like a stretch. You've just done the first year at Darden.
Exactly, and I forgot so quickly, having worked for so long, how much of work is managing people and how much of work is like depending on your team. And so I think when I look back at my first year, I really appreciate all of those experiences because I know whatever job I'm going to go into, especially, trying to strive for management and, corporate officer roles, that it's going to a lot of it's going to deal with like people management, stakeholder management, and kind of understanding what your team needs to be successful.
So you're back here in Charlottesville now, second year. We're recording this conversation in early 2019. Graduation's on the horizon. How's your second year been going?
Second year is great. So there's a big dichotomy between first and second year at Darden. One, I think because you just know what you need to do and how to come in and knock it out. But two, because, you're spending a lot of time helping first years and thinking about what your next steps are. So I've been traveling a lot. That's one of my passions before coming to business school, and something that, you have a little bit more time to do second year, not worrying about recruiting. And then also just been spending a lot of time with my classmates. And so wanting to get to know people a little bit more personally. I think, a lot of people prioritize a lot of different things in second year, but I think the relationship portion is really big because, as you mentioned, we're kind of realizing that, we graduate in 5 months, a little less than 5 months. And so, actually 4 months. So, those relationships are really important right now.
Yeah, there is a 1-year reunion, though, here at Darden. That was one of the things that always struck me as amazing, right? You graduate, and then a year later, people are already coming back.
Yeah.
So do you know what you're doing after school?
Yeah, so I'll be going back to Microsoft, and I will be working within the cloud group again. So looking forward to kind of rejoining my team, which has grown a lot since I've been there, and really kind of taking on a couple of projects that I worked on over the summer full time.
So what's on your bucket list here before you graduate? And you mentioned, obviously, people wanting to get to know all their classmates and really focusing on those relationships. But where else do you hope to spend your time before graduation?
So I've been picking up a lot of hobbies, and so start taking guitar lessons. So we want to kind of master or reach some certain level of mastery of that. I want to get out a little more, do a little bit more hiking. I'd done some of that when I was here before, but hadn't had as much time to do that here. And then really traveling. A couple of our Brazilian classmates are leading a trip to Rio, and so that was always on my bucket list, going to Carnival. So I'll get to knock that one off. And then, yeah, like you said, just really spending time with some of the friends that I've made here. It feels really special, and I do think they're going to be some lifelong friends.
So I always ask the sort of last question, which is, what would be your advice for prospective students who are either thinking about an MBA or thinking about Darden?
Yeah, I'd say, it sounds cliche, but really try and find that fit. It took me a while, and it'll always be a tough decision. But I would say if you are sure that you want to get your MBA, go for it. The payback period, however long it might be, it's so worth it to switch your career or to chase whatever it is that, you feel like you want to be doing. And so MBA is a huge opportunity to switch your career and switch your focus. And so I think that's invaluable. My advice otherwise would be do your homework, make sure you know what you're getting into. I think, a lot of people think it's just 2 years. All the programs are pretty similar. And I think while the value of an MBA, if you're going to top 20, top 10 school is going to be pretty universal in terms of, earning power, the experience while you're there is a lot different. So if you want to be in a place, where you're going to get to know your classmates, there are a lot of great schools for that. But, those are a lot different than your big city schools. And so really just think about what you want out of the program, where you want to be after business school, and then dig in and kind of do a lot of thinking. And also visit every school that you want to attend. If I can't say enough how much coming to Darden and sitting in a classroom changed my mind about everything in terms of fit and where I wanted to be for my MBA.
Well, Marlon, thank you so much for taking time to be here. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was my conversation with Marlon Evans, a second-year student in our class of 2019. So as always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we are all ears. We can be reached at darden@virginia.edu. Until next time, thanks for listening.